the 5 most dangerous women in the Bible. Throughout the Bible, numerous figures are remembered for their transgressions. Among them, a handful of women stand out for their actions, which caused immense harm to the innocent, defied God's commandments, and left a legacy of pain. These stories serve as reminders of human frailty and the consequences of sin, while also highlighting God's ability to use even the darkest moments for His purpose. Here are 5 of the most dangerous women in the Bible, ranked from least to most malicious. So, Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife lived during the time of Joseph, a son of Jacob, who had been sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. Joseph became a servant in the household of Potiphar, a high-ranking Egyptian official. Recognizing Joseph's abilities and the favor of God upon him, Potiphar entrusted him with managing his entire household. However, Potiphar's wife harbored sinful intentions. Overcome by lust, she repeatedly attempted to seduce Joseph. Day after day, she tried to lure him into committing sin, but Joseph, steadfast in his faith and loyalty to Potiphar, refused her advances. He declared, "How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Genesis 39:9. Angered by his rejection, Potiphar's wife resorted to deceit. When Joseph fled from her grasp, leaving his garment behind, she used it to falsely accuse him of attempting to assault her. This lie led to Joseph's imprisonment, despite his innocence. Potiphar, enraged by his wife's claims, had Joseph confined to the king's prison. While Potiphar's wife's actions brought suffering to Joseph, they also set the stage for God's greater plan. In prison, Joseph continued to find favor with God and eventually rose to prominence after interpreting Pharaoh's dreams. He became the second most powerful man in Egypt, preparing the nation for a devastating famine and ultimately saving countless lives, including his own family. Potiphar's wife may not have faced direct consequences for her deceit, but her actions remind us of the harm caused by false accusations. Yet, through it all, God's divine purpose prevailed, turning her evil intentions into a pathway for Joseph's destiny. Delilah. Delilah's story unfolds during the time of the Judges, a period of conflict between Israel and its enemies, including the Philistines. Delilah lived in the valley of Sorek, a region closely tied to the Philistines. Though her nationality is not explicitly stated, her actions aligned her with Israel's adversaries. Samson, a judge of Israel known for his extraordinary strength, became infatuated with Delilah. The Philistine leaders saw an opportunity in this relationship and bribed Delilah to discover the secret of Samson's strength. Motivated by greed, she agreed to their plan. Delilah persistently pressed Samson for his secret, using emotional manipulation to wear him down. After several attempts, she succeeded in extracting the truth, that his strength lay in his uncut hair, a symbol of his Nazirite vow to God. While Samson slept, Delilah had his hair cut, rendering him powerless. The Philistines captured, blinded, and imprisoned him. Delilah's betrayal had devastating consequences for Samson and Israel. Yet, even in his weakened state, Samson called upon God one final time. Regaining his strength, he brought down a Philistine temple, defeating his enemies in an act of sacrifice. Delilah's legacy is one of treachery and manipulation, driven by greed and allegiance to Israel's foes. Her actions highlight the dangers of misplaced trust and the destructive power of betrayal. Jezebel. Jezebel, the infamous queen of Israel, was married to King Ahab. She was a Phoenician princess, known for her devotion to Baal, a pagan deity. Upon becoming queen, Jezebel aggressively promoted Baal worship, leading Israel into idolatry and turning the people away from God. Jezebel's evil deeds were numerous. She orchestrated the murder of Naboth, an innocent man, to seize his vineyard for her husband. She ordered the slaughter of God's prophets and supported false prophets who led the nation astray. Her influence over Ahab and her unyielding opposition to God made her one of the most notorious figures in the Bible. Jezebel's story culminates in her dramatic downfall. The prophet Elijah foretold her demise, and her end came when Jehu, an anointed king of Israel, had her thrown from a window. Her body was devoured by dogs, fulfilling Elijah's prophecy. Jezebel's legacy is a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition, idolatry, and defiance against God. Her name remains synonymous with wickedness and rebellion. Herodias. Herodias was the wife of Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee. She was previously married to Herod's brother, making their union both scandalous and unlawful under Jewish law. John the Baptist openly condemned their marriage, calling it sinful. Herodias, enraged by John's accusations, sought revenge. She manipulated her daughter, Salome, into playing a key role in her scheme. During a banquet, Salome's dance pleased Herod, prompting him to offer her anything she desired. At her mother's urging, Salome requested the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Herod, though reluctant, fulfilled the gruesome request to save face. John the Baptist, a prophet who prepared the way for Jesus, was executed because of Herodias' vengeful plotting. Herodias' actions reveal the destructive power of pride and vengeance. Her determination to silence John the Baptist highlights the lengths to which she would go to protect her reputation, even at the cost of an innocent life. Isawike. Athaliah. Athaliah, daughter of Jezebel and Ahab, was queen of Judah and one of the most ruthless women in biblical history. Following the death of her son, King Ahaziah, Athaliah seized power. To secure her throne, she ordered the massacre of all potential heirs, including members of her own family. Athaliah's reign was marked by violence, idolatry, and oppression. She promoted Baal worship in Judah, continuing the legacy of her mother. However, unbeknownst to Athaliah, her grandson Joash was hidden by his aunt Jehosheba and raised in secret. After 6 years, Jehoiada, the high priest, orchestrated a rebellion. Joash was crowned king, and Athaliah was executed. Her death ended her tyrannical rule and restored the Davidic line to the throne. Athaliah's story is one of ambition taken to its darkest extreme. Her willingness to destroy her own family for power underscores the destructive nature of unchecked greed and idolatry. Lessons from these women. The stories of Potiphar's wife, Delilah, Jezebel, Herodias, and Athaliah serve as sobering reminders of the consequences of sin. These women, driven by greed, lust, vengeance, or ambition, caused immense harm. Yet their stories also reveal God's ability to bring redemption and purpose, even in the midst of evil. From Joseph's rise to power to Samson's final act of strength, these accounts demonstrate that God's plans cannot be thwarted. The lives of these women, though marked by wickedness, remind us of the importance of faith, integrity, and obedience to God. Conclusion. The Bible's portrayal of these dangerous women is not meant to vilify all women, but to show the impact of choices made apart from God's will. Their actions teach valuable lessons about the destructive power of sin and the enduring hope of God's sovereignty. Even in the darkest moments, God's purpose shines through, reminding us that His plan will always prevail. The dangerous women of the Bible, Delilah and Herodias. The Bible contains accounts of women whose actions caused harm, betrayed trust, and defied divine laws. Among them, Delilah and Herodias stand out for their treachery and the devastating consequences of their choices. Their stories serve as reminders of the destructive power of greed, manipulation, and vengeance, and the enduring justice of God. Delilah, the betrayer of strength. Delilah's story is one of betrayal and manipulation, leading to the downfall of Samson, one of Israel's greatest judges. Samson, renowned for his unparalleled strength, was a man chosen by God to deliver Israel from its enemies, the Philistines. His strength was tied to a vow of dedication to God, symbolized by his uncut hair. The Philistine rulers, desperate to subdue Samson, saw Delilah as their opportunity. They bribed her with a substantial sum of silver to discover the secret of his strength. Motivated by greed, Delilah agreed to their plan. Delilah employed persistent nagging and emotional manipulation to coax Samson into revealing his secret. Despite his initial resistance and attempts to mislead her, Delilah's relentless pursuit eventually wore him down. Judges 16:17 describes her tactics. And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, his soul was vexed to death, and he told her all his heart. Samson finally revealed that his strength lay in his uncut hair, a symbol of his Nazirite vow to God. Seizing the moment, Delilah lulled Samson to sleep on her lap and called a man to shave off his 7 locks of hair. With his hair gone, Samson's God-given strength left him. The Philistines captured him, gouged out his eyes, and imprisoned him in Gaza, where he was forced to grind grain, a humiliating fate for a man once revered as Israel's protector. Delilah received her reward from the Philistine rulers, 100 pieces of silver from each leader. This reward underscores the immense value the Philistines placed on neutralizing Samson. However, her greed and betrayal had far-reaching consequences. Samson's humiliation turned into a moment of redemption when, during a Philistine celebration in the temple of Dagon, his hair began to grow back. Samson prayed to God for one final act of strength. God answered, and Samson brought down the temple, killing himself and many Philistines, including their leaders. Delilah's betrayal set the stage for this climactic act, but it also cemented her legacy as a figure synonymous with treachery and greed. Her story serves as a warning about the devastating consequences of selfishness and manipulation. Herodias, the ruthless queen. Herodias, a prominent member of the Herodian dynasty, is infamous for her role in the death of John the Baptist. Herodias was initially married to Herod Philip, her half-uncle. She later divorced him to marry his half-brother, Herod Antipas, the Tetrarch of Galilee and Perea. This union was politically motivated but deeply controversial, as it violated Jewish law. And Herodias harbored a bitter grudge against John the Baptist, a prophet who publicly denounced her marriage to Herod Antipas as unlawful. Herodias, humiliated by John's condemnation, sought revenge. However, her husband Herod, though disturbed by John's rebukes, respected the prophet and was hesitant to harm him. John remained imprisoned but unharmed, as Herod feared both divine punishment and public backlash. Herodias' opportunity for revenge came during Herod's birthday celebration. She manipulated her daughter, Salome, into performing a dance that greatly pleased Herod and his guests. In his delight, Herod made a grand promise to Salome, offering her anything she desired, up to half his kingdom. Seizing the moment, Herodias instructed Salome to ask for John the Baptist's head on a platter. Herod was deeply troubled by this request. Though he respected John and knew him to be a righteous man, Herod felt compelled to honor his public oath. Reluctantly, he ordered John's execution. The prophet was beheaded in prison and his head was presented to Salome, who then gave it to her mother. Herodias' vengeful scheme silenced John the Baptist, but it revealed her ruthless and manipulative nature. John, a fearless preacher of God's truth, became a victim of her wrath, his death marking one of the most tragic moments in biblical history. Consequences of their actions. Both Delilah and Herodias caused immense harm through their choices. Delilah's betrayal led to Samson's capture and suffering, while Herodias' manipulation resulted in the death of John the Baptist. Yet, their stories also highlight the sovereignty of God and the eventual downfall of those who oppose his plans. Delilah's greed brought about Samson's temporary downfall, but it also led to the destruction of the Philistine leadership and a demonstration of God's power. Her actions, though motivated by selfishness, became part of a larger narrative that showcased God's ability to use even betrayal for his purposes. Herodias, in her quest for vengeance, silenced a prophet but could not stop the spread of his message. John the Baptist's legacy endured, his life and death continuing to inspire believers and point to the coming of Jesus Christ. Herodias' actions, while seemingly successful, revealed the destructive nature of unchecked pride and vengeance. Lessons from their stories. The stories of Delilah and Herodias serve as stark reminders of the consequences of aligning oneself against God and His people. Both women were driven by selfish desires, Delilah by greed, and Herodias by pride and vengeance. Their actions caused pain and suffering, but they also highlight the resilience of God's plans. Delilah's betrayal teaches the dangers of manipulation and the importance of faithfulness to God. Her story warns against placing trust in those driven by selfish motives. Samson's eventual redemption, despite his suffering, underscores God's mercy and His ability to bring victory from defeat. Herodias' ruthless pursuit of revenge shows the destructive power of bitterness and the lengths to which pride can drive a person. Her story challenges us to examine our own hearts, urging us to choose forgiveness over vengeance and humility over pride. Eternal lessons. While Delilah and Herodias are remembered for their treachery, their stories are not just tales of wrongdoing. They remind us of God's enduring justice and His ability to work through even the darkest moments to fulfill His purposes. Their lives stand as cautionary tales, urging us to align our actions with God's will and to avoid the pitfalls of greed, pride, and manipulation. These stories also remind us of the resilience of God's people. Samson, despite his betrayal and suffering, was ultimately restored and used by God to achieve a great victory. John the Baptist, though martyred, left a legacy that pointed countless souls to Christ. Conclusion. Delilah and Herodias left behind legacies marked by betrayal and vengeance. Their stories are warnings of the harm that can come from selfishness and the misuse of power. Yet, even in their darkness, God's light shines through, reminding us of His sovereignty and the ultimate triumph of His plans. As we reflect on their lives, we are reminded to choose faithfulness, humility, and love over greed, pride, and revenge. These stories challenge us to live in alignment with God's will, trusting in His justice and His ability to bring good from even the most difficult circumstances. The most dangerous women in biblical history. The Bible recounts stories of individuals whose actions brought destruction, sorrow, and division. Among them, several women stand out for their ruthless pursuit of power, treachery, and defiance against God's laws. From Delilah's betrayal to Jezebel's reign of terror, their legacies remind us of the consequences of unchecked ambition and rebellion. Soul. Herodias, a plot fueled by vengeance. Herodias stands as a figure driven by revenge and manipulation. She was a member of the Herodian dynasty, married first to Herod Philip and later to his brother, Herod Antipas, a union considered unlawful by Jewish standards. This controversial marriage became the center of Herodias' bitterness when John the Baptist openly condemned it, calling it a violation of God's law. John's bold proclamation angered Herodias, who harbored a grudge against him. Though Herod, fearing public outcry and recognizing John's righteousness, kept the prophet imprisoned, Herodias waited for the right moment to act. That opportunity arose during Herod's birthday celebration. Herodias instructed her daughter, Salome, to dance for Herod and his guests, a performance that pleased the tetrarch greatly. When Herod promised Salome anything she desired, Herodias seized the chance, urging her daughter to ask for John the Baptist's head on a platter. Though distressed by the request, Herod honored it to maintain his public image. John the Baptist was executed and his head presented to Salome, who then gave it to her mother. This act silenced John but revealed Herodias' ruthless nature and her willingness to manipulate even her own daughter for vengeance. Herodias' story serves as a grim warning about the dangers of unchecked anger and pride. Her eventual fate remains unclear, though her husband, Herod Antipas, faced exile in Gaul after accusations of conspiracy against Rome. Herodias' legacy is one of vindictiveness and treachery, demonstrating the devastating impact of vengeance on individuals and their families. Athaliah. a ruthless pursuit of power. Athaliah, the daughter of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, inherited her parents' idolatrous tendencies and thirst for power. Married to Jehoram, king of Judah, she became a central figure in the political alliance between Israel and Judah. Her influence over Judah grew after her husband's death and her son Ahaziah's brief reign as king. When Ahaziah died, Athaliah sought to secure her rule by eliminating any potential challengers. In a shocking act of brutality, she ordered the massacre of all royal heirs, including members of her own family. This ruthless purge aimed to consolidate her power and prevent any opposition to her authority. However, unbeknownst to Athaliah, her grandson Joash was hidden by his aunt Jehosheba. For 6 years, Joash remained in the temple, safeguarded by the high priest Jehoiada. Athaliah ruled Judah during this time, continuing the idolatrous practices of her parents and exerting a tyrannical grip on the kingdom. Athaliah's reign came to an end when Jehoiada orchestrated a rebellion to restore the Davidic lineage. He revealed Joash as the rightful king and rallied the people against Athaliah. The coup succeeded, and Athaliah was executed, marking the conclusion of her bloody rule. Her death symbolized the end of her family's influence over Judah and the restoration of godly leadership under Joash. Athaliah's story is a stark reminder of the corrupting influence of power and the devastation wrought by unchecked ambition. Her actions left a trail of suffering and death, but they also highlighted the resilience of God's plan through the preservation of the Davidic line. Jezebel, the queen of wickedness. Jezebel, the daughter of King Ethbaal of Sidon, was a woman of immense influence and unparalleled infamy. Married to Ahab, king of Israel, Jezebel brought the worship of Baal and Asherah into Israel, leading the nation into idolatry and moral decay. Her marriage to Ahab was a political alliance, but her influence over him extended far beyond politics, shaping the spiritual direction of Israel. Jezebel's acts of evil were numerous. She orchestrated the murder of Naboth, a righteous man, to seize his vineyard for Ahab. She ordered the slaughter of God's prophets, replacing them with prophets of Baal and Asherah. Her relentless promotion of idolatry plunged Israel into spiritual darkness, provoking God's judgment through the prophet Elijah. One of the most dramatic confrontations between Jezebel's forces and God's prophet occurred on Mount Carmel. Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal to call upon their God to ignite a sacrifice. When Baal failed to respond, Elijah called upon the Lord, who sent fire from heaven, proving his power and sovereignty. Despite this clear demonstration of God's might, Jezebel remained defiant, threatening Elijah's life and forcing him to flee. Jezebel's end came during the reign of Jehu, a king anointed to destroy her family and purge Israel of Baal worship. When Jehu arrived in Jezreel, Jezebel adorned herself and mocked him from a window. Jehu ordered her servants to throw her down, and she was trampled to death by horses. Her body was devoured by dogs, fulfilling Elijah's prophecy. Jezebel's legacy is one of rebellion, idolatry, and unrepentant evil. Her name has become synonymous with wickedness, and her story serves as a warning about the consequences of defying God and leading others astray. Lessons from their lives. The lives of Herodias, Athaliah, and Jezebel reveal the destructive power of unchecked ambition, vengeance, and idolatry. Each woman's story is marked by betrayal, manipulation, and a disregard for God's laws, leading to suffering for themselves and those around them. Herodias demonstrates the dangers of pride and revenge. Her determination to silence John the Baptist shows how anger can lead to devastating consequences, not only for its target, but also for those who act upon it. Athaliah represents the corrupting influence of power. Her willingness to destroy her own family for the sake of her throne highlights the dangers of ambition without restraint or morality. Jezebel embodies the consequences of idolatry and defiance against God. Her actions brought spiritual ruin to Israel, and ultimately led to her violent downfall. God's sovereignty amidst evil. Despite the harm caused by these women, their stories also highlight God's sovereignty. In each case, God's plan prevailed, and his justice was ultimately served. John the Baptist's legacy endured, pointing people to Jesus Christ despite Herodias' attempt to silence him. The Davidic line was preserved through Joash, fulfilling God's promise to David, even as Athaliah sought to destroy it. Jezebel's death and the eradication of Baal worship in Israel demonstrated God's power to cleanse and restore his people. Conclusion. The stories of Herodias, Athaliah, and Jezebel are cautionary tales of the consequences of turning away from God. Their actions caused immense harm, yet they also underscored the resilience of God's purpose and the inevitability of his justice. Through these narratives, we are reminded to guard our hearts against pride, greed, and vengeance, and to align our lives with God's will. Their legacies, though marked by darkness, serve as powerful lessons on the importance of faith, humility, and obedience to God. The legacy of Jezebel, a tale of wickedness and justice. Jezebel, queen of Israel and wife of King Ahab, left behind a legacy defined by idolatry, manipulation, and cruelty. Her actions brought devastation to her people and deepened Israel's spiritual rebellion. Jezebel's story is one of unchecked ambition, her ruthless pursuit of power, and the ultimate triumph of divine justice. A devotee of Baal. Jezebel's devotion to Baal, a Canaanite deity, defined much of her rule. As the daughter of Ethbaal, king of Sidon, Jezebel brought the worship of Baal and Asherah into Israel, promoting these pagan practices and leading the nation into spiritual decay. Her influence over King Ahab was profound, and together they built altars and temples for Baal, turning Israel away from Yahweh. 1 Kings 16:31-33. Jezebel's promotion of idolatry was not just religious, but also political. By aligning Israel's worship practices with those of her homeland, she sought to consolidate her power and strengthen ties with foreign allies. However, this led to widespread apostasy and corruption, distancing Israel from its covenant with God. The murder of Naboth. One of Jezebel's most heinous acts was her role in the murder of Naboth, a righteous man who owned a vineyard coveted by Ahab. When Naboth refused to sell his vineyard, citing loyalty to God's inheritance laws, Jezebel devised a wicked plan. She orchestrated false accusations of blasphemy and treason against Naboth, leading to his unjust execution by stoning. 1 Kings 21:7-16. This act of treachery showcased Jezebel's willingness to use deceit and murder to achieve her goals. Ahab, though complicit, appeared powerless under Jezebel's domineering influence. Naboth's death not only allowed Ahab to claim the vineyard, but also marked another step in Israel's moral decline. Conflict with Elijah. Jezebel's reign brought her into direct conflict with the prophet Elijah, a fierce advocate of Yahweh's worship. Elijah challenged Jezebel's idolatry in a dramatic confrontation on Mount Carmel. There, he called upon Yahweh to prove his power, and fire descended from heaven to consume Elijah's sacrifice. The prophets of Baal, whom Jezebel had supported, were defeated and killed. Furious at Elijah's victory, Jezebel vowed to kill him, forcing him to flee into the wilderness. 1 Kings 19:1-2. Her relentless pursuit of Elijah reflected her deep hatred for those who opposed her religious agenda and her determination to maintain control over Israel's spiritual direction. Persecution of prophets. Jezebel's campaign against Yahweh's prophets created a climate of fear and oppression. She ordered the execution of many prophets, seeking to eradicate their influence. This persecution forced Obadiah, a faithful servant of the Lord, to hide 100 prophets in caves to protect them from Jezebel's wrath. 1 Kings 18:4. Her actions demonstrated her ruthless desire to eliminate any opposition to her idolatrous practices. Elijah's prophecy of judgment. Jezebel's actions did not go unnoticed by God. Through Elijah, a prophecy of divine judgment was declared against her and her family. Elijah foretold that dogs would devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel, a vivid image of the consequences of her wickedness. 1 Kings 21:23. This prophecy signified that her reign of terror would not go unpunished. The fall of Jezebel. Jezebel's downfall came during the reign of Jehu, a military commander anointed by the prophet Elisha to bring an end to Ahab's dynasty and cleanse Israel of Baal worship. Jehu's rebellion began with the execution of Ahab's sons and other members of the royal family. Jezebel, aware of Jehu's approach, adorned herself and taunted him from a window, perhaps attempting to assert her authority or sway him with her defiance. Jehu, unmoved by her display, ordered her servants to throw her down from the window. Jezebel fell to her death, and her body was trampled by horses. When the servants returned to bury her, they found only her skull, feet, and hands. Dogs had devoured the rest of her body, fulfilling Elijah's prophecy in a gruesome manner. 2 Kings 9:30-37. A legacy of wickedness. Jezebel's story remains a symbol of treachery and immorality. Her name has become synonymous with manipulation, idolatry, and rebellion against God. Her life serves as a cautionary tale of the destructive power of unchecked ambition and the consequences of defying divine authority. Despite her efforts to establish Baal worship in Israel, her legacy was ultimately undone by God's justice. Jehu's actions marked the end of her family's influence and a turning point in Israel's history. Her death demonstrated that no ruler, no matter how powerful, could escape the judgment of God. Lessons from Jezebel's life. Jezebel's story offers several important lessons. The consequences of idolatry. Jezebel's devotion to Baal led Israel into spiritual ruin. Her actions remind us of the dangers of turning away from God and placing trust in false idols. True worship requires faithfulness to God's commandments and a rejection of worldly influences. The dangers of manipulation. Jezebel's use of deceit and manipulation to achieve her goals caused immense harm to others. Her life illustrates the destructive impact of using power for selfish purposes and the suffering it brings to innocent people. God's sovereignty and justice. Despite Jezebel's efforts to suppress Yahweh's worship, God's plan prevailed. Her death and the downfall of her family demonstrated that God's justice is inevitable, even against the most powerful rulers. The importance of faithful witnesses. Elijah and the prophets who stood against Jezebel's idolatry serve as examples of courage and faithfulness. Their willingness to confront evil, even at great personal risk, inspires believers to stand firm in their convictions. The broader context. Jezebel's story is part of a larger narrative about the spiritual struggles of Israel. Her reign highlights the challenges of remaining faithful to God in the face of cultural and political pressures. It also underscores the importance of leaders who prioritize righteousness and the well-being of their people over personal ambition. The consequences of Jezebel's actions extended beyond her lifetime. Her influence contributed to Israel's eventual exile, a period of profound reflection and renewal for the nation. Her story reminds us that our choices, for good or ill, have lasting impacts on those around us. Conclusion. Jezebel's life stands as a powerful warning against the dangers of idolatry, manipulation, and defiance of God's will. Her actions brought suffering to Israel and led to her own downfall. Yet her story also reveals the unwavering justice of God and the resilience of those who remain faithful to Him. As we reflect on Jezebel's legacy, let us strive to live with humility, integrity, and devotion to God. By seeking righteousness and rejecting the paths of greed and ambition, we can honor God's commandments and contribute to a world marked by love, justice, and faith. Thank you for engaging with this message. May Jezebel's story inspire us to choose paths of goodness and faithfulness. God bless you, and may His justice and mercy guide our lives. Amen.